My name is Joanne Evans, Associate Professor in the Department of Human-Centred Computing in the Faculty of IT at Monash, and I join with the other speakers in acknowledging that we're on unceded Wurundjeri land, and also my support for the treaty processes, and yeah, just absolutely great to hear of the progress that is being made there, and to think about, yes, how we can facilitate that in small ways over the next few months leading up to that April event when we hopefully will have our first treaty in place. Very exciting. So it's great to be part of the annual Castan Centre for Human Rights Law Conference and to be chairing this first panel on the participatory rights of children in out-of-home care. I'm delighted to be presenting a panel that combines lived experience, academic research and regulatory expertise on this important topic. I'm hoping and indeed expecting that it will generate an interesting conversation with a focus on putting participation at the heart of action in care contexts to address the challenges that Liana has laid out for us. So to begin with a short introduction to the two panel members joining Liana, firstly, Amelia Hunt, who is a Youth Engagement Project Officer at the Commissioner for Children and Young People. Amelia is in the final year of a double degree of Bachelor of Laws, Bachelor of Global Studies at ACU, and is a passionate advocate for human rights, the environment and policy change that puts children and young people at the centre of decision-making processes. Amelia is also one of the 2024 winners of the ABC Haywire Storytelling Competition, which seeks to showcase the voice of young people living in regional and rural Australia. And so congratulations on that, Amelia. And for our panel today, she's going to be talking to her lived experience of the out-of-home care system and how that has led to her involvement with the CCYP Youth Council and the role that she is now playing there. So please join me in welcoming Amelia. Our second panel member is my colleague, Dr. Jade Purtell. And having met Jade just as she was starting her PhD around 8 years ago, it does still give me such a thrill to say that. Yeah. Jade is a transdisciplinary researcher working across academic and community contexts, bringing both her passion and expertise in participatory theory and action to promote young people's voice and agency in policy development and decision making to improve care systems and care experiences. She does that on a global scale, being the co-convener of the International Network on Participation in Alternative Care, and she was co-editor in 2022 of the book Children's Rights to Participate in Out-of-Home Care, International Social Work Contexts. So delighted to be working with Jade on our real-time rights-based record-keeping governance project with Melissa as one of the co-CIs on that, which she might say a little bit about in her talk. So please join me in welcoming Jade. So we're going to kick off the panel with short presentations from Amelia and Jade, and then a bit of commentary in between from the panel, and then we'll open that up for you, the audience, to be part of the discussion. So I hope you've got lots of questions from Liana's talk, but do keep on thinking about them so that we can have an engaging conversation. But I am under strict instructions that we have to bring things to an end at 12:35. So without any further ado, I'll hand over to Amelia. Thanks.
Everyone. I'm Amelia. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm here today to talk, obviously, about children's rights and the rights of children and young people in care in particular. So I'll be talking, kind of as Joanne said, from two perspectives. I've got lived experience of the out-of-home care and child protection systems, and I've also been working with the Commission for Children and Young People over the last 4 years as well. So first off, I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about myself, just for some context. I grew up in public housing in Bendigo on Dja Dja Wurrung country with my mum and my twin sister, and just a heads up, I tend to use we more than I. It's kind of automatic, but you'll get used to it. So I'll take us back a few years. In 2018, 2 weeks before starting VCE at a brand new school, I was sitting in a child protection interview room, being told that I couldn't go home. Something that was said in that first meeting that always stuck out to me was that we almost weren't removed because we would be turning 17 in a few months. I don't know about you, but for me, it seems strange to be told that, but also we were removed anyway, so it was obviously bad enough in their eyes. Looking back, we consider ourselves very lucky that we were removed. Of course, it wasn't perfect and it was scary, but I honestly don't know if I'd be where I am today 6 years later if we hadn't been. A pre-planned sleepover with friends became a kinship placement. This suddenly broke down after 5 months, and after being dropped off to a new placement with other family friends, we had no contact with any child protection workers for 5 weeks. It wasn't until the agreed end date of that placement was approaching that we ran around like headless chooks trying to find someone to tell us what was going to happen next. Eventually, the decision was made for us to return home, although we weren't considered in making this decision, and given no alternatives, we had no choice, even though it wasn't technically safe. I'd like to say that the quote that Liana mentioned earlier, like you're a puppet and they're just pulling the strings, is the perfect way to describe the care experience. Even at the age of 16, we were excluded from care team meetings, kept out of the loop, and not given space to have a say in decisions affecting us. It was scary, and honestly, not knowing what was happening was probably one of the most stressful things about that time. What we have to remember is that the smallest things can make the biggest difference for people. For example, after returning home, our youth workers supported us to advocate to be allowed to attend our care team meetings, which we'd been excluded from. If this hadn't happened, we wouldn't have been in the room to correct the child protection workers when they said that we'd only been in care for 2 weeks. It had been 6 months. That's a pretty big difference, right? And would anyone else have corrected them? Probably not, because their records had 2 weeks, and why would someone question that? But it shows that by having the people that lived it in the room, the full picture was revealed. Something that's really important to consider when engaging with children and young people, and to be honest, anyone really, is that it's not as scary as you think. When I first interacted with the Commission, I filled out a survey for the In Our Own Words inquiry Liana mentioned. Back in 2018, the option was given to me to opt in to be contacted about future decisions, and I decided, why not? Jason, who I now work very closely with, reached out a few months later to let me know about some other opportunities to be involved in, and when the In Our Own Words inquiry was being tabled in 2019, he reached out to give me the opportunity to be involved in the launch. I had exams, so I couldn't actually make it, but then in 2020, when we were in our first lockdowns, Jason reached out to ask if I'd be keen to help out with a project to hear from children and young people about their experiences of COVID, which I'm sure we all remember. I jumped at the chance, and myself and 3 other incredible young people joined the inaugural Youth Advisory Group. Something that stuck with me over the years that he said was, "It'll be like flying the plane while we're building it." This simple statement clearly conveyed, we don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but we want to do it anyway. This transparency is key. By being open and honest about the process and all of the unknowns, the 4 of us were able to help shape it. There was no sense of hierarchy. We worked with staff and interacted with the commissioners and felt valued in the project. To be honest, this work was probably the best thing to come out of those lockdowns. From there, the influence and the impact of the Youth Council has grown so much over the last 4 years. We've done a lot, and we're continuing to find ways to expand and do more. There have been a number of iterations of the Youth Council over the years, and currently we've got about 15 young people with diverse backgrounds, aged 15 to 24. They're involved in projects across the Commission, from helping shape consultations with young people on various projects to creating social media posts and being involved in systemic inquiries. The possibilities are kind of endless. But some of the key things that have made it work over the years are that it's flexible. Each individual person gets to choose what they want to be involved in and how they'd like to be involved, and they drive work within the Commission as well. As someone who started on the Youth Council and is now in a part-time role, something super special is that I feel valued in the same way now, as I did when I was on the Youth Council, and I think that's quite telling. The organisational structure and culture is built around valuing children and young people and ensuring that we have input into decisions that affect us. The Let Us Learn inquiry, which again Liana mentioned before, into the educational experiences of children and young people in out-of-home care, which was tabled in November, had input from children and young people from start to finish. and that's pretty cool. We were involved in planning the consults with children and young people, coming up with questions, testing them with a group of young people as well. Some of us even got to go on regional trips with staff around the state to conduct consults. I actually went on exchange for a semester, so missed out on 6 months of the process, but as soon as I came back, reached out to say I'd be keen to help out, and ended up being given a part-time project officer role. So I was able to help support the drafting, and as I'm sure many of you know, referencing is something super fun that we love, right? So I really got to appreciate referencing and really build my skills, to be honest, actually. So that was nice. So it was more fun than it sounds. So essentially, from there, the Youth Council were also involved in coming up with recommendations. So the ideas that we'd had, like, as staff and then as Youth Council members, they were all informed by young people that have lived the system themselves, which is really, really important. One of my favourite things about this inquiry is that we have all of Chapter 2 dedicated to youth voices, quotes from hundreds of children and young people that we spoke to, and something really special about our inquiries is that we consider lived experience and the voices of children and young people to be just as important as the data and academic research. Yes, the report has a lot of data that is super crucial to back up our points, but we also have quotes throughout the whole report from stakeholders and children and young people that support this data. As someone who's lived it and knows that, sometimes there's errors in record keeping or they don't capture that full picture, being able to talk to people who are living it right now, we can see what's actually happening on the ground and ask them what they think would work better. So it pairs together really nicely. One of the things that's actually been recommended over the years in a number of our inquiries that was backed by what's been said in consults with young people and more generally is that there needs to be a complaints function for children and young people in care. And as of the 1st of July, we've been given some extra powers to help us advocate for children and young people involved with the child protection and the out-of-home care systems. We don't have extra funding at the moment, but we're doing our best to ensure that we can do a good job. And in doing this, the Youth Council's involved in trying to make sure that we design it in a way that is effective, and especially talking to people that would have and will be using this function. It's going to be much more effective than it would have been without that consultation. Last year, the Commission took the next step in its evolution, committing to creating 2 roles dedicated to young people. The roles have a strategic element, connecting all the areas of the Commission to ensure we continue to enhance our work through the involvement of young people. In March this year, Connor, an incredible human and passionate advocate, started working alongside me at the Commission, and we're both Youth Engagement Project Officers. I must say it's been incredibly special to see how much the Commission has evolved over the last 6 years in the ways that we embed the voices of children and young people in our work. Another cool thing about this job is that we're really busy and got good direction, but we're also able to shape it in some ways as well. I feel very lucky to have had the opportunity to use my lived experience to help create change in the out-of-home care and child protection systems. But I've also discovered how passionate I am about making sure that all children and young people are involved in decisions that impact them, which is all decisions. Because there will always be children and young people out there that take on responsibilities that are typically considered adult only. We need to make sure that everything is more accessible to children and young people, because also by making it accessible to children and young people, if anything, we're making it more accessible for everyone. Something that Kira, who was on the Youth Council a few years ago, used to say was, why do we need 2 versions of things? We should always be able to have one version that is accessible for everyone. And I'd like everyone to take that away today and think about it, because it's true. We overcomplicate things and think they're going to be too difficult, but think about the bigger picture and the real impact of what you're trying to do, and just give it a go. Don't be afraid to set flight of your own plane before it's fully built. You'll enjoy the ride, and I've got no doubt you'll see the positive impacts. Thank you.
So thank you, Amelia. I hope that's on. Yeah, thank you, Amelia, for so thoughtfully and elegantly sharing your care story with us, and I guess thank you also to you and the other members of the Youth Council for all that hard work, because I think underneath that story is a lot of hard work and dedication by you all to make it and be making it what it is today and what hopefully it will continue to be. So thank you very much. Liana, would you like to add anything to what Amelia has said about the Youth Council?
I don't want to say too much, and it's actually quite remarkable just hearing Amelia describe it. I think what you heard from me and from Amelia when she was talking about her own experiences in care is that actually at a kind of practice level, working with individual children and young people, and it's not just in child protection, it is much more broadly, people are deeply uncomfortable or not confident to talk with children and young people. Those of you who know family violence work, there's been an evaluation of the risk assessment framework, and it wasn't looking specifically at issues for children, but one of the key findings was that a whole range of different professionals aren't confident doing this risk assessment process with children because they'll need to engage with children. So there's something about we just need to get better at focusing on children and engaging with children and hearing what they have to say and giving weight to that, both when working with them individually and then when developing up the policies and the practices and the reform agendas that are going to impact them. So I think what Amelia has kind of managed to do really beautifully is talk about the need to build children's participation individually, but if you're not in a case manager role, but you are interested in human rights, in social reform, in policy reform, and any of that impacts children and young people, you should be bringing them in to that as well.
Yes, very much the case of listening, learning, acting. It's like that sort of progression at both individual and collective levels, which I think is going to be a really nice segue into Jade. Talking about participation from an academic research perspective. So thanks, Jade.
Good morning, everyone. I've got a bit of a cough, so if I run off stage, it's because I'm no longer able to speak. So it's my great pleasure, and it's an absolute privilege to be joining you here today in this discussion of human rights law. And in our current work across Monash Law and Monash IT on rights-based record keeping for out-of-home care and participatory governance, with Professors Castan and Patterson from Law and Associate Professor Joanne, and also Elizabeth Shepherd from UCL London. Thanks to Professor Laura Lundy's participation modelling for the UN, we've been thinking a lot about Article 13 of the UNCRC. And so Article 13 outlines children and young people's rights to seek, receive and impart information. And Joanne's previous work on record-keeping rights was largely brought about because care-experienced people's rights to access their care records and information about their time in care were not being realised. And looking at governance models to secure these kinds of rights in our current project, we think that tokenism in participation is partly underpinned by children and young people not being properly informed about issues to do with their care, both individually and collectively. Children and young people in care are also restricted in what information they can impart into their records to have them reflect their own memory, identity, and accountability needs. Article 13 therefore also relates to children and young people's rights to participate in creating the records about their lives and histories that make up their care files. When people think about what they would save if the house is on fire, it's often the photo albums and family memories and other sentimental belongings. And our current practices in out-of-home care do not privilege positive memory making for positive identity development and we need children and young people's memory artefacts to form part of the records of their time in care. We also need processes that actively engage children and young people in thinking about what they want in their lives and their futures, and ensuring that these things are communicated to the care team and recorded in planning documentation. Children and young people need to have developmentally appropriate communications that answer identity questions about where am I from, who loves me, why am I in care, what options are available. And so Article 13 rights to information are necessary to the realisation of Article 12 rights to participation. Being well informed is critical to making good decisions, and ensuring children and young people have access to the information they need to input into decisions made about their care is important. So the most basic processes for participation by children and young people in decision making about their care are through the assessment and planning procedures employed by multiple systems across disparate services that children at risk come into contact with. And for a child placed in formal care, there are meetings of professionals to plan their care, and in theory, children are able to contribute to these meetings and planning reviews. However, in practice, the nature of care team meetings and independent reviews are adultist spaces that fail to make room for young people's concerns and their voices, and sometimes they're not invited or allowed to be there anyway. So, record-keeping research has highlighted otherwise underexplored limitations of care systems governance and records as a contributing factor to negative in-care experiences and poor outcomes for care leavers. And at the practice level, record-keeping procedures for out-of-home care and associated services that fail to serve individual memory, identity and accountability needs have lifelong impacts. We know that identity and culture are of fundamental importance to healthy development and well-being, and yet our record-keeping systems do not fully support the co-creation of care records by children and young people to realise their record-keeping rights. At the macro policy level, record keeping for monitoring and evaluation creates datasets that are deficit focused and that stigmatise marginalised populations. And deficit focused datasets support institutional racism, surveillance bias, discrimination and othering, and they statistically misrepresent so-called hard to reach groups who are largely absent from voluntary research studies. Implications for artificial intelligence following from these practices are alarming. So, in terms of encouraging children and young people's active participation, through the last decade we've witnessed the development of an authorising environment for greater individual, group and collective participation by care experienced children and young people in governance functions and processes. And this has been in part because of the direct and indirect advocacy of care experienced people, supported by government and the community sector, and in part through research employing more progressively participatory approaches, and also largely resourced through reforms brought about by recognition of wrongdoings through Victorian and Australian Royal Commissions and other major inquiries, and the adoption and implementation of the Victorian and then now National Child Safe Standards by the Commission in Victoria and other agencies nationwide has seen rights to participation instituted in regulatory mechanisms. And in some respects, we're leading the world in these participatory policies. Participation at an individual level, though, often can become procedurally tokenistic, and where participation is required and compliance of that monitored, it's likely to be added to the checklist of things that must be done, so they're rushed through and ticked off rather than becoming a seamless part of everyday practices, everyday rights-based practices, that improve children and young people's experiences overall. The authorising environments we need for children and young people's participation to increase are created when we overcome epistemic injustices which tell us that knowledge based on lived experience is less relevant than other forms of knowledge. Knowledge and opinions based on lived experience come from the coalface of practice, where policy usually fails to permeate. We cannot know what is happening on the ground with our fabulous policy reforms without lived experience representation in our governance processes and structures. And when our governance processes create room for the participation by care-experienced and service-connected advocates, we hear what's actually working and not working.
Thanks very much, Jade, for, yes, I guess those forthright words of why participation is such a game changer if we get it right. So, Amelia, would you like to add anything to what Jade said there?
I will, just something little that was really great. And it sort of got me thinking about how, particularly, for participatory, I can't even say the word you know the word that I'm trying to say. Anyway, one of the things that I think we need to think about is that for children and young people to participate in conversations and have that space, it shouldn't be on them and us to fight for that space. That space should be created by the adults in the room and by those structures. And it should be done in a meaningful way. And again, not be tokenistic. It's not a tick the box. It's a, we want to hear from you and here's this space. But also they're not obligated to take up that space as well. Creating that space doesn't mean that someone then has to stand in there and go, okay, cool, I'll use this space. Because again, they have every right to make that choice themselves. It's more just having that option given to them. And then also, just quickly, being flexible with how we hear that voice as well. And meeting people where they're at. So, not everyone's comfortable coming into a room full of adults and having to speak. They might want to write something down and have someone else read it out, or it could be anything. It depends on the individual. I just wanted to.
Thanks, Amelia. Yes, it's so important that to learn how to create that space by actually having that participation in what that space looks like without those sort of assumptions of coming to our adult space. It's and let's listen to what you want to say. It's it's just such the wrong model for making that happen, which causes that participation being a choice not to participate. Yes. Liana. Yeah.
Is that working? Yes. I'm kind of, there's not much I can add really to what Jade and Amelia have said. I'm thinking of what we come across at the Commission, which is people being adults, and including professionals, being really not only scared to engage because they're not very confident in engaging with children, but also one of the big impediments to children and young people, particularly with lived experience of care or child protection, being involved is that adults are worried about re-traumatising them. So they're worried about asking particular questions. They're worried about even opening up the conversation. And I just have to say I've learnt such an enormous amount from different youth council members, amongst others, with whom we've worked, who almost overwhelmingly say, when you're scared to ask us about blah, you're actually only protecting yourselves. We've lived it. we continue to live with that. Yes, you need to be conscious about how you set that up and what supports you provide and how you do that in an appropriate way. But actually, when you don't ask the question at all, when you just have areas that are no-go zones, you're actually just continuing to silence us. So there's been some of those conversations that I've had directly have been pretty powerful. Which go to, the bigger picture is, the more you're working with children and young people on these issues, frankly, the more you learn, because there's a whole lot we don't know, right?
Yes, I will echo how much I've learned from having conversations with care experienced people, and yes, just learning how to have those conversations as well too. It's like, and I'm very, very grateful for the care experienced people that I've worked with, because they have just taught me so much. It's like, and I think. Similar to what's happening today, it's like it makes you therefore want to be an ally to advocate for their needs in transformational kind of ways. Yeah.